Hey, this is Dr. Johnson, and I want to introduce you to another primary source activity you could do with students called Balderdash. This is adapted from the party game Balderdash, where you divide up into teams. Each team has an unusual word, and the team is going to try to fool you by having one person in that group tell you the true definition of the word, but everyone else on that team is going to give you fake definitions, and you have to guess which one is true. So you'll see how that works. If you've played Balderdash, this will be very familiar. If not, you'll understand when we get through. Now, just like in the party game, the best way to play this is with small groups. This doesn't work well with just individual students, and it doesn't work as a whole group. The ideal grouping is about 4 to 5 students, and when you get your class into small groups, you give each group a primary source. And as long as that primary source has a good fact or story behind it, it really doesn't matter what type of source you use. It could be a poster, a map, a photograph. It's really the fact or the story that's the important part. Because those groups are going to break off, they're going to look at their primary source, they're going to look at that interesting fact or story, and when they come back to the whole group, one person in the small group is going to tell the truth behind the primary source, and the other people are going to make up a lie to try to mislead everyone about what the true story or fact is. And then as a class, you have to guess what the truth is. This is really a great introductory activity to a topic, by the way, because it can get kids engaged in some really fun facts or stories that might lead to some more great questioning about a historic topic. So let me show you how this is played. For instance, and I've just chosen the example, the presidential inauguration. There's some very interesting things that have happened throughout the presidential inauguration in the U.S. For those of you that don't know, there are 4 distinct things that happen during a presidential inauguration. There's the actual inauguration itself, where the president takes the oath of office. Afterwards, the president usually gives a speech of some sort. Following the speech, there's usually a parade from the Capitol building to the White House. And following that, there will be some sort of a party or a reception, a ball held that evening. And like I said, there have been some really interesting things happen during the presidential inauguration. For instance, William Henry Harrison in 1841 gave the longest speech in presidential inauguration history. It lasted almost an hour and 45 minutes. But the interesting fact that you may not know is that he was a stubborn man. It was a cold, rainy day, and he refused to wear a coat because he didn't think it would look good. He caught a cold afterwards. The cold developed into pneumonia, and within a month he was dead. The shortest U.S. president in history. Another interesting fact, Abraham Lincoln's second inauguration in 1865, if you look closely at this group of people, you may recognize the face of John Wilkes Booth. President Lincoln's assassin actually attended his inauguration and heard his inauguration speech in 1865. George Washington, the very first presidential inauguration in 1789. During the inauguration, there's a set word or phrase that they use as they get sworn into office, and George Washington added at the end of that, "So help me God." And since that time, even though it's not part of the official wording of the swearing in of the U.S. president, the term "So help me God" has been added by every U.S. president since. And Woodrow Wilson, he's an interesting one. In 1913, he was inaugurated as president, and as his inauguration ball, he canceled it. He did not want a party afterwards because he felt that the dancing at the time, the Lindy, I forget the names of some of the other dances, he felt that they were too risque, and he did not want to promote risque behavior. So he canceled his inauguration ball because of that. But let's play our game right now. The inauguration of Andrew Jackson. He's the president you probably recognize from the $20 bill. His inauguration in 1829. I'm going to tell you 4 different stories about it. One of these stories is true. The other 3 are all lies that I've made up. Obviously, it's just me doing this. If I was working with my elementary students, you would have 4 different students, each one telling you the different one. But you figure out which story is true and which one is a lie. And by the way, I have this great drawing that was published in newspapers about the president's inauguration and one of the events that took place. So the first story I want to tell you is that at the inauguration there was a protest because this election in 1829 was a very heated political campaign, like many are, but this one even more so because Andrew Jackson was competing against John Quincy Adams, who was the standing president at the time. And they had competed in the presidential election 4 years earlier. So there was already kind of bad blood between them. And so when President John Quincy Adams was defeated in the election by Andrew Jackson, there was a lot of contention. And when the president arrived at the White House, when President Andrew Jackson arrived at the White House after being sworn in, he was greeted by a large protest of John Quincy Adams supporters who for hours and hours cheered and jeered all the way until the evening when the U.S. Army was called in to escort and move these protesters away from the White House so that President Jackson could settle down for the evening. That's story number one. Story number two, which may or may not be true. At the inauguration, because it was such a heated political contest between John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson, caused a lot of contention in the nation. Remember, this is 1829. This is only 50 or 60 years following the Revolutionary War, and only 30 or so years, within 30 years, we would be involved in a civil war. So a lot of discord still in this brand new nation, the United States. And to kind of help build the nation and kind of build unity, because of this very heated race he had had with John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson decided that he would host his inauguration, his swearing in, and his speech at the White House. This is where the first term, the People's House, kind of came about. He wanted to make this a people of the United States and unify a nation that was struggling a little bit at the time. So he broke tradition and held the inauguration swearing-in speech and his speech that he gave afterwards at the White House. Third story, which may or may not be true. President Andrew Jackson was sworn in at the Capitol building, and he was what we might call a people's president. He won because of the foundation of the hard workers, the people who didn't have an education, the people who felt that they were vilified for being poor, but also felt like they were the foundation of the nation. And so to kind of honor the people who had voted for him, he held a party at the White House, a reception. And it wasn't by invitation like had been done in the past. This was an open party. Everyone was invited to his inauguration party / ball at the White House. And the party, of course, everyone came. And there was food, and there was drink, and there was lots of drink, and there was so much drink, and the White House was so crowded that eventually Andrew Jackson almost got crushed to death by the crowd of people wanting to see him. So much so that it's rumored that he was actually had to sneak out of the White House through a window to escape the crowd that wanted to meet him and greet him, and most of them were drunken. And there's even some rumors that he might have been in danger, and so he ran away from the White House to escape this crowd of a party that he threw. So, fourth story, which may or may not be true. John Quincy Adams lost. He was the standing president. He had lived in the White House for the last 4 years, but he had lost the presidency. The only person before him that had lost it was his own father, John Adams. And he was not happy about losing the presidency. So kind of as I'm going to get back at you at Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams decided not to move out of the White House in a timely fashion, should we say. So when Andrew Jackson arrived from the inauguration, through the parade, arrived at the White House, John Quincy Adams was leisurely moving out at the time. And of course, this created an uproar. Who would believe the president should have been moved out so that the new president could have moved in? And it accomplished exactly what John Quincy Adams wanted, which was to kind of grate and get the new president, Andrew Jackson, a little angry and upset. And of course, they were able to move everything out by the end of the day, but still, Andrew Jackson took this as a very personal slight and never had a good relationship with John Quincy Adams after that time. So there's your 4 stories. The question I have for you is, which one of those stories is true? Was it the protest that occurred? Was it the moving day with President John Quincy Adams didn't get moved out? Was it the massive raucous party that got out of control? Or was it the fact that they held the inauguration and speech at the White House? Think for just a moment. Which one is true? 3 of them are false. Only one of them is true. And if you guessed that it was the raucous party at the White House, you would be true. There was quite a raucous party at the White House, and it was open to everyone. And let me just read this account. Accounts vary, they say. Some say it was a wild party where furniture was destroyed and the mob and the people had to be lured outside with punch alcohol. Others say that the riotous atmosphere was fabricated by Jackson's enemies in the newspapers and that the party was actually quite tame. Now, no one disputes that the number of people at the party was insanely large. Jackson had to get out, so it's rumored that he escaped through a White House window or that his staff quietly escorted him off the property. A couple different accounts, but the fact is there was quite a wild, large party there. So I hope you got that right. That's how the game of Balderdash is played with these primary source documents. And like I said, it could be used with lots of different topics and themes and different primary source documents. What I like to do is prepare the documents ahead of time for students. So on the Andrew Jackson document, you see that one side has the primary source photo that the class is going to be looking at, perhaps on the big screen or maybe just students showing them. And then on the back side of the primary source is the actual story and the background for the students to read, so that one student can kind of summarize that and the others would not. And these are great primary source sets to keep. I keep them by topic. So this is my presidential inauguration set. So if I'm introducing this topic to the class, I could actually form my students into 9 or 10 different groups, because that's how many of these laminated sets that I have. And each group could come up with their own stories and play this little game to introduce the topic. So, thinking about Balderdash, what do you think the basics are? Do you remember the basics? What size of a group does this work well with? How could you adapt this with different learners? What type of primary sources? Do you remember which ones are best to use Balderdash with? And then, when do you think a teacher might use this in the classroom? Those are some things you ought to be thinking about and you really ought to know. And you ought to try this sometime. It's really a lot of fun.